Welcome to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my co-host, John Barker, representative from the 70th District. That's John on the left on your screen as you're looking at us. And in the middle is Scott Schwab, Kansas Secretary of State. And Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Honored to be here.
And John, this is Legislative Updates, so bring us from where we are now.
Well, you know, we've finished around the 1st of May, and we may go back on the 23rd of May, depending on what the Supreme Court decides on the congressional maps. I've been busy going around to different communities doing legislative updates, but the governor has also signed a few of our bills. One was very important, and Scott, who the Secretary of State, likes this bill. It came through my committee, and it's House Bill 2138, and I think he's going to go through it a little bit later. She also signed House Bill 2466, and this is the one that I'm very supportive of. It requires all school districts to have a computer science course, not online, in person, because, you know, these kids, during the pandemic, were doing all this stuff at home. The computer skills are lacking. They need that to get out in the adult world and to go to college, so I'm glad to see the governor signed that bill. The other bill that was interesting is 2106. That's the cut the tax on food. And I noticed that she had a press release recently about axing the tax. Well, in 2019, we passed almost the exact same bill. And it stepped down each year. And had she signed that and not vetoed it in 2019, we wouldn't have any food sales tax today. But we did get the bill through. She did choose to sign it. So food sales taxes are going to go down next year from 6.5 to 4, and then after that they'll go down again, and then eventually we'll have no food sales tax. Now that does not mean that the cities and the counties and such will not have their food tax. We don't have jurisdiction over that. But I thought that was good. She also signed Senate Bill 84, which is the gaming bill. Had to do with being able to make a bet on college and professional ball games. We are the 38th state that has passed that. It resulted out of a 2018 Supreme Court decision. So she's been busy, we've been busy, but I'm so glad that Scott's here. When I went to the legislature 10 years ago, he was an experienced legislator, and he was at that time the chairman of elections. So he's been in the election business for a long time, and he's very knowledgeable. And then later, he was Speaker Pro Tem.
Correct. Yes.
And it was fun watching him share. He knows the rules, and you need to know the rules. And I was the rules chair at one point in time when we were serving together. And it was always a joy to, you know, he would give me advice on occasion, and I always took it and considered it valuable advice.
Oh, thank you.
But with that, Doug, that's about all we know. We're going back on the 23rd. Hopefully it's 1 or 2 days, and then we'll be out of there.
Okay. All right, Scott, you wouldn't necessarily know this about John, but he was a judge for many, many years in our district. And John would always use that line of, well, I know the rules. And so when he was so authoritative about, I know the rules, we just assumed that he did know the rules. And it always worked well for him.
I remember I used a Supreme Court Rule 161 quite often. And I would always ask the attorneys, and they would not know. And I said, that's decorum in the courtroom. You need to take a break and go back and read it, because your decorum in the courtroom is not appropriate.
An attorney not being appropriate? No, for sure. No,
he wasn't referring to me.
No, never done.
They never called the rule on you. They called the rule on the other people.
So we have not seen the governor veto any bills that we've sent to them during our veto session, and hopefully she doesn't. And you know, we can go back in, and we could probably make that sine die, and that would be the last day, and then we can get out and do other things in our communities. And I know a lot of legislators are out talking to city and county commissioners about what we have accomplished in the legislature, and we've accomplished a lot. You know, I was able to last year to do Value Them Both amendment. I helped draft it. I introduced it in the House. We got it passed, and then it went to the Senate, and they passed it. You know, this year we did the Sanctuary City bill. Last year I did the gun rights bill, which reduced the concealed carry from 21 to 18, because other states have that. So it's been a good 2 years. And so I always encourage people, August 2nd, which is the primary day, remember, value them both will be on the amendment. You need to vote for that so that the state legislature and not the court system would make decisions on abortion.
Okay. All right. We're going to cut away. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. You're watching Legislative Updates with John Barker and Scott Schwab. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with co-host John Barker. On the left of your screen and in between is Scott Schwab, the Secretary of State. Scott, you've been in the political field for some period of time.
Yeah.
Tell us what your background is in the political field.
Yeah, I first got elected in 2002, which was after a redistricting year. And I was in a new district, and I had just got done putting my wife through pharmacy school. So the question was, what do you want to do now? Because my job was to get her through school. She goes, well, I'll put you through school. So I took my LSAT, and I was going to go to KU Law, and I ran into an old friend and found out I was in a brand new district and that I could run for legislature. So my wife said, why don't you just run, and then someday when you lose your next election, you can go back to law school. Well, 4 kids later in 20 years, I have no plans to go back to law school. But that's how I got in the beginning, was just had an opportunity. I was like 2 hours short of a minor degree in poli-sci from Fort Hays State. And so I just thought it would be a great experience, and I loved every part of it, and chaired elections. I was vice chair for 2, chaired it for 4. I was vice chair of tax. I was chair of financial institutions, and then became speaker pro tem.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Covered some ground.
He was vice chairman on elections, and so he's been involved in elections for a long time. Very knowledgeable.
Yeah, thank you.
I remember you complimenting Mike Heim one time, because Mike Heim is our reviser, and he's like me, old. And he always really appreciated Scott, because Scott asked important questions,
Good.
as he would say. But
Good.
yeah, it was a good deal.
Well, all right. So what district were you in when you were first elected?
Yeah, well, I was first elected in 2002. The first time I ran, I was out in Hays and didn't win, and that was in '94, which is where I got the bug. But I got elected in the 49th district, which is in Olathe proper. When it was first redistricted, it had Olathe with a little bit of Overland Park, and then we redistricted again in 2010, and now it's just Olathe, and now it's all carved up.
Okay. All right. So the 4 kids, are they all grown now?
Well, they are. So I got, well, not really. I got one that's 18, so he's going off to college to play baseball at Benedictine. We had one who would be 16 that we lost in 2016. Oh. And then we have a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old. So I got 10 years apart.
Okay. All right. Okay. So fill us in about, if you want to talk about Secretary of State duties, well, I'd kind of like to know what those are. I see your name on
a lot
lots of things.
Yeah, so let's talk about that first before we talk about the elections bill, if we can, real quick. What we do is, if you start a business, the first thing you do is file with our office. If you have an LLC, you file with us. And what we've wanted to do since we first ran for office in 2018 was, when you get done, let's say you're putting up a restaurant down here in Chapman or in Abilene, you file with us, but then you got to go to the Department of Ag and get your permit for a restaurant. And then if you're going to sell any spirits, you got to go to revenue. And if you have employees, then you got to go to labor. And then if you need help from the state, you got to go to commerce. We said, well, why don't we just make it one thing? And so what we created is ksbiz.kansas.gov. And if you can go there, right now it's a wizard to help you start or close or sell a business. But once we get off our current computer system, which is drastically outdated, and onto the new one, which will be next year, which is why we're running for re-election, because we want to finish this project. When you start that restaurant, we'll just walk you through all the questions. You click send, and your permits just come in the mail. And so the other thing we've done to make it easier is that it's a biannual filing. So rather than file every year, next year you'll be able to file once, and you can forget about it for 24 months. Just trying to make it easier. We don't get tax dollars for our agency, so we're just trying to make it easier to interact and do business with the state of Kansas as it relates to creating a business. And right now we're starting about 136 new businesses a day. We normally do 110.
Wow.
So a lot of folks that lost their job during the pandemic, they're creating their own companies. So we want to do what we can to foster this small business growth that's really starting to happen in Kansas. It's really exciting. Now, the elections bill, the biggest piece of election reform we did was 11 years ago, we did voter ID. That way we knew you are the person who you say you are, and your vote is yours. Well, we haven't done much since then because we want to make sure everything was deployed and implemented at an equal level across the state. Well, this year, especially with a lot of the accusations in other states about voter fraud and malfeasance, we wanted to make sure, well, it's like cybersecurity. You're secure today, but are you secure tomorrow? So what we wanted to do is just make sure we put in some simple measures to make sure our elections are trusted. And that's what we campaign on, is trusted results. And so one of the things we did is we found out that although it's against the Federal Election Assistance Commission to have voter machines connected to the networks and cell networks, it's not in Kansas law. Well, what if they change? Do we want that connected? No. So we made sure we put it in statute that voting equipment in Kansas that's against the law if it's connected to any cell network or the internet.
Right.
We want to make sure we shut that down. It's just cybersecurity, basic security. The other thing that we do is we put in another measure that we can take people off their voting rolls. Right now we can take them off if they've passed or if they've moved out of the state or if they unfile. But now if we have a voter that hasn't done anything for 4 years, we send a notice. And if we don't hear back for 4 years, then they come off the roll. So we know some people only vote in presidential years. So we want to make sure we hit 2 of those cycles to make sure we're not taking off legitimate voters off the rolls. But, you know, I talked to a state representative or a state senator out of Lawrence, Kansas. She says she works as a poll worker, and she said she saw names on the voter rolls from people that live in the dorms that were there when she was in college.
Yeah. Well,
she's in her 50s.
Well, Scott, my son graduated in '93. He had voted here. He went to Texas, but every time I go to the polls, I say, my name is John Barker, and they'll go down the list. John C. I said, no,
that's
my son.
Right.
He's lived in Texas for 20 years.
So this is a great conversation.
Right.
So now this notice will allow us to take that, because otherwise it's on your son to contact that county clerk to unfile, because that county clerk can't just start pulling names off the voter list. The last thing I want to do is show up to vote, my name's not there because they thought I wasn't there.
Exactly, and he's voted in Texas.
Well, that's
good. For those years, but it is interesting how long they keep them on. I mean, from '93 and the last election, it was the same problem. I'm John E. He was John C. They asked me that. C comes before E.
Yeah, well, and the last thing in that bill that passed, and again, thanks for all your help on getting the bill through conference committee, is it allows us to do an additional post-audit election. We've done over 300 post-audit elections since we took office. Not one county has failed. But that being said, what these close races, we want to make sure we do another audit. So that was in the bill, and so we want to stick that way.
Audit. Yeah.
Correct.
Right. Good. It was a good bill.
All right, we're going to cut away, take a break. You're watching Legislative Updates. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson. John Barker, the co-host on the your left side of the screen from the 70th District. And in the middle, of course, is Scott Schwab, Kansas Secretary of State. And Scott, we were talking about some of the elections and really protections to make certain that the elections are valid and reliable.
Correct.
And so you want to continue with...
So one of the things, and before we broke away, we talked about how we did 300 post-election audits. And what that is it's not just an audit like you think of in accounting terms. So you get done with the election night, and our clerks are up till 4 o'clock in the morning finishing tabulation. The next day, our office, we pick a random race, they pick a random precinct, and they have to do a hand count of that precinct. So what that means is they take 2 people from the community that have not been poll workers, or 3 people from the community of at least 2 different parties, political parties, and they pull out a ballot like this sheet of paper and they say, all 3 of us, do you agree what this ballot says? You do? Okay, there's one. And they do that to every ballot. If that doesn't pass, then they got to do another precinct. If that one fails for that race, they got to do the entire county statewide. That's a failure. In all our years of office, we've done over 300 of those. Not one county has failed. And this is the importance to know that, our ballots are paper. All counties, whether you're using a pen or you vote on a voting machine, they all print off a paper ballot. So make sure you check that ballot. I tell folks, your ballot is your responsibility. You fill it out and you make sure it's tabulated correctly by looking at it, and then you put it in the box. So, but what we did this year with the new bill with the post-election audits is we added another provision where people think there's voter fraud is a race that's close. So if there's a race where it's less than 1%, we'll do an additional audit and we'll audit 10% of the precincts. That way the candidate, who's normally doesn't have tons of resources, doesn't have to pay for a recount. And it also takes some of the onus on our county clerks. Our county clerks do fantastic work. Our poll workers do fantastic work. But if it's 1%, guess who gets blamed? them. Well, this takes it off them and say, hey, we did an additional postal election audit and we did 10% of the county, and guess what? It's still zeroed out. And to let you know how well we've done it, in southeast Kansas, Senator Virgil Peck was a close race, and the Democrat Party sent in a bunch of attorneys because they were going to make sure that that election turned out the right way. And they recounted, hand counted, and it came out exactly perfect as they projected for the Board of Canvassers. Our clerks, our poll workers do a great job. If folks think there's a lot of fraud or there's a lot of issues, man, we always encourage them to go be the eyes on the election. You'll get paid. Go be a poll worker, and you don't have to be 18. You could be 17 or 16. And I'm going to tell you, these young folks that understand electronics really do help us in our election systems, especially in the metro areas.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. There was another bill that was passed, not allowing the governor or any executive officer enter into an agreement. You want to mention that?
So, yeah, one of the things it has to do with is it just limits our power and it leaves it with the legislature.
Right.
And I'm the first Secretary of State to serve as Secretary of State coming from the legislature in nearly 100 years. And what's important about that is sometimes if you start in the administrative branch, you forget how important that legislative branch is. And so we saw a lot of this during the pandemic where a lot of administrators, whether it was the governor or whether it was some of these county health directors, started taking power that were policy issues that really should be determined by a legislative elected body. And so we had, as Secretary of State in some areas, a little too much power, and we worked with the legislature to say, yeah, you can pull some of that back.
Yeah, and it worked well.
Yes.
And the governor has signed it.
Yes, and if we need some help, we have no problem going back to the legislature saying, hey, we need help.
Right.
Would you help us in this policy position? But that way they're invited into the conversation, especially as they're the ones that are going to go back to their local areas of the state and explain what they did.
What do you think in the future? I mean, what would you look at next year for the legislature to assist on?
Well, so we may need some things on business services, and because there's a lot of statute cleanup we could do, because a lot of this was written over 120 years ago, so terms have changed and just the way people create businesses have changed. So we've got some suggestions for just basically technical cleanup, both on the election side and business side. But we're real big advocates of saying, unless it's emergency, once you change the election law, then wait. So all the folks that are voting don't feel like it's a new experience and get confused and then not vote, because we want people to vote. And we also want folks that are working the election, whether it's the poll workers, the judges, and the county clerks, we don't want them to get confused because, oh wait, this all changed, and this county did it this way, and this county did it that way. So we're working really hard to train. We've hired an election security trainer for all 105 counties. She's focusing on the big five, and she used to be the Johnson County election clerk, and she has been a professional witness in federal court for election lawsuits. So she really knows the system, and like she'll tell you, Connie will tell you, she bleeds red, white, and blue. She loves the election process, and she just wants to help Kansas. So we contracted with her to help implement this new law and also make sure. We had a lot of new clerks. We've had a lot of turnovers after the pandemic. A lot of folks kind of stepped out. So we want to make sure they're getting all the training they need. Any resource we can give them, we want to be able to.
Do the county officers depend on you for training?
They do.
County clerks
They do. Because we're the ones who write the standards.
Right.
But they're really good about training each other as well. But we want to help. So if there's an issue in Sedgwick and there's an issue in Shawnee, well, they're on the same system. One should have either they both have the issue or neither of them have the issue because they're on the same system. And that training takes care of that.
Yeah.
Well, you know, one of the things I see, Scott, with the elections, and of course I'm county councilor for Dickinson County, and so I see how the clerks work so hard, and they take that very serious about every ballot, and it's really amazing to watch, and I know that seems to be the standard across the state.
Yep.
I know other states have problems with it, perhaps, but Kansas, I haven't seen anything that would indicate Kansas is having trouble with it.
And that's why they're not calling you guys to sue anybody or arrest anybody, because it's hard to create a crime showing your ID. It's hard to cheat if you're showing your voter ID. And we're one of the few states that have voter ID for advanced mail ballots. So that's even difficult to cheat on because you have an ID tied to that envelope that the ballot's in. So, you know, a lot of folks come from out of state and attack the integrity of Kansas elections, and I think they're trying to raise money, but they haven't worked Kansas elections like what you've seen. And that's why, you know, our county clerks, they really do take it seriously, and I have a lot of respect for them because of it.
Yeah, and I've seen, of course, the training that's taken place too, because they'll say, well, we need to, and then they'll fill that gap in. They'll say, we need to talk to Scott. Well, they don't say it like that, but they say we need to contact the Secretary of the State of Kansas. And, yeah, some do, I'm sure. And so, it's nice to know that system is working and working very well. We're going to cut away and take a break. We'll be right back. You're watching Legislative Updates. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. This is our final segment for this show. And as always, John, thank you so much for coming in.
Glad to come.
And thank you for bringing Scott. Scott, thank you so much for coming in and
Honored.
sharing that information, because what you're sharing with us, it just, to me, and I'm assuming to all of the listeners, it just gives confidence to the election process for the state of Kansas, and that is so important.
Yes, it is. It's
And when
very
you put the stats that you're talking about, how we go through and check this, and there's no variance to it, and the people are taking it serious. Hope you've enjoyed watching Legislative Updates. See you next time.